Welcome to the Good Growing Podcast. I am Chris Enroth, horticulture educator with University of Illinois Extension, coming at you from Macomb, Illinois, and we have got a great show for you today. What's going on? I don't know. And by what's going on, I mean what's going on out in our gardens and landscapes. Oh my goodness, the questions are pouring in. We've had drought, we've had rain, we've had all the types of weather this year, and that means problems. Problems are occurring. And you know I'm not doing this by myself. I'm joined, as always, every single week by horticulture educator Ken Johnson in Jacksonville. Hey, Ken.
Hello, Chris. It's been an up and down year for the questions and panic that people have had in the garden.
Oh, most definitely. Now, I think we called it a few weeks ago. We're like, hey, it's been dry, and then we got all this rain. I'm like, guess what's coming up? The disease questions, like all this other problems that we just like is building up. So drought's kind of a silent disaster. Nobody really notices the effects until a few weeks after. But then, we have plants that are now dealing with that drought stress that we have occurred, like no rain in the month of June. And then July, at least for some parts of Illinois, were the wettest on record for that month. So it has been a definite roller coaster.
Yeah, now that it was dry and then got lots of rain, and now everybody's tomatoes are cracking, and a lot of other fruit issues associated with lots of rain after lack of water. So,
yeah, if your tomatoes aren't cracking, you're probably growing underneath plastic or something there, in a high tunnel or a greenhouse. So,
or you've got one heck of a water bill.
Yeah, that's true. You've just been dumping the water on the ground there. So I envy you. But I wanted to share something with you, Ken. So I was on a site visit, and I just so happened to come across a beautiful dog day cicada. So let me throw that picture up real quick just so I could share this with you. So Ken, I wonder, do you see what I see? This lovely cicada coming out of its shell, its larval pupal. Exoskeleton. There we go.
Beautiful.
I thought it was just gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Let's see. I kind of came in there more towards on top of it on this picture, but the wings, it's like a rainbow of like blues and yellows and purples. And I'm guessing, is that just before the wings sort of harden off and change to their final color? Or did I find something rare and unique? Should I go run back to this tree and grab the cicada and sell it and pin it?
Yeah, it looks like the wings have fully expanded. Yeah, now they're probably just hardening off. I've never actually seen one in the process of coming out, though, for annual cicadas.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Well, we know it's annual. It has the black eyes. It kind of has that army fatigue camo color to its body. And then, it doesn't have the red veins of the wings either. So, but instead the veins are like, I thought it was gorgeous. So, look out for those dog day cicadas as they're emerging from their exoskeletons. It is lovely sight to see.
Yeah, I think their most recent Call of the Wild podcast was on cicadas as well. So you can learn about, a scissor grinder cicada, one of the ones we hear in the summer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Brody Dunn's podcast, Call of the Wild. So we can link to that one also, so you can hear and learn all about the cicadas. Well, Kid, I guess before we dive into, all the things going on out in the world that we are dealing with, how are you dealing with things at your backyard, in your neck of the woods? I've been to your place a few weeks ago. Things were jamming, coming along. I'm guessing you're just, like swimming through tomatoes, corn, celery, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's going pretty good. The mulch, the cover crop mulch is still holding strong. So minimal weeding so far. The corn is just starting to tassel, but it's like, I don't know, it's probably like 9-10 feet tall now. And one of the storms that came through snapped a bunch in half, and actually snapped it. So it's going to be a little bit of a disappointing year for corn, but it's now shading out stuff because it's so tall. So we've got quite a few peppers. Peppers are doing really well. Tomatoes are coming in pretty well as well. So celery is still nice and very intense celery flavor, probably because it's been so hot and lack of water. But
Mhm.
I'll have to try that when it cools off a little bit and the rain. No, we had plenty of rain, but now the rain's shut off. So I think it's supposed to be another week before we get rain again.
Yeah. Well, while I was gone for a week, the bunnies or somebody found I had a lot of parsley. It just vanished. It's just gone. It is no more. I know it wasn't like a swallowtail or anything like that, larva, caterpillar, because usually you get stems or something that's left behind. This is just something like pulled it out of the ground and like drug it off into the woods, and um, it was carnage. So it was pretty bad. But I really noticed this year. I've tried doing a lot of in-ground planting with my vegetables, and every once in a while, we get a really good year, but more consistently, my in-ground vegetables just don't do much of anything. I should do a soil test to figure out why, but I haven't. So that's what I should do. But instead of doing that, I went through the extra hoops of comparing in my in-ground peppers, and then I potted some up into containers, and I like compared and contrast them. In my containers, I'm getting all types of peppers and stuff. Now my peppers I put in the ground, nothing. They're just sitting there. They're not unhealthy looking. They're just peppers. They're not full or anything. They're just like a stalk with some leaves. So I should probably do a soil test.
Same sun exposure.
Yep, same sun exposure. Yeah, they're near each other. So I'm like, well, that potting soil is giving you something that my native soil is not.
Sounds like a do as I say, not as I do situation.
Exactly. Yep. Now, listeners, viewers, just know I soil test for work. I should probably also do it for personal at-home use too.
Learn from our mistakes.
Yes, exactly. Well, speaking of learning and mistakes, not necessarily mistakes, just like the things that nature and plant gardening, horticulture, all that stuff throw at us. We have a slew of questions that have come into our inboxes, our offices, and all of that. And so, Ken, I guess let me kick this one off. I'm going to throw this one to you because you're the one who actually helped me with this question. I was sitting at a baseball game a few weeks ago and had a conversation with someone, and they said, "Oh man, there are these green bugs covering my daylilies, and they're just eating all of the daylily flowers." I said, "Well, boy, I really don't know what that would be. I thought perhaps aphids or something along that, or a four-line plant bug, cucumber beetles." And then a few days later, they sent me an email with a picture. And then I sent that email to you because I'm like, I have no idea. Ken, what in the world is eating this guy's daylily flowers?
So this was northern corn rootworm. I think you mentioned this person lives surrounded by cornfields.
Correct. Yeah.
So, if you live anywhere near corn, especially if you have cornfields surrounding you, this is one you probably seen before. So it's a small green beetle. So during the spring and stuff, the larvae will feed on the roots of corn, and they can cause some pretty significant damage to corn if you get high enough populations. At a midsummer time frame, they'll pupate, turn into adults. The females will lay eggs in the soil, and then they'll kind of disperse after the egg laying. And oftentimes you'll find them feeding on your flowers. So I've got sunflowers. I've seen them quite a bit on, just completely eat all the ray flowers or disc ray flowers off. Mm-hmm. You get them on squash and stuff, all kinds of flowers, eating those petals on the flowers. You can also see them on cucurbits, pumpkins, and stuff, feeding on the rinds sometimes as well, along with cucumber beetles. So they can be an issue this time of year. Fortunately, there's not a whole, as far as flowers go, there's not a whole lot you can do because anything you'd spray to kill those is going to kill any pollinator that goes on there. Short of bagging those flowers, netting them, and it's going to have to be really fine, like cheesecloth type. It's really the only way to keep them off, but then you can't see the flowers. So what's the point in doing it? I guess if you're taking something to the state fair this week, maybe you'd want to net them, save nice, pretty flowers. But other than that, it's a live and let live. Stuff's going to look pretty ragged once they start feeding on it, but fortunately, there's not much you can do about it.
Yeah. And in this case, it was daylily flowers. And so like, well, they only really last a day. So you're not going to miss out that much on the flowers.
But tell them to rotate their crops. Maybe they'll have fewer.
Yeah, it seems to be a pretty consistent issue with continuous corn planting. Like, and then even through, so after you found that, I saw that the northern corn rootworm has now adapted that it has an extended diapause, which means it can lay eggs, and then those eggs can then lay dormant for up to 4 years, they said, which that's a long time to have to wait. But really, that's only been found in the Midwest.
So yeah. So if you live by corn, just gonna have to deal with it. Oh, yeah, sorry. Just deal with it. All right. So our next question here is problems with pin oaks. And there's many problems. So for this particular one, sounds like this tree is green. So we're not having any of the chlorosis we typically see, but it's frequently losing large limbs in windstorms. The person's worried it's hollow inside, is going to fall over on a house. Had an oozing wound that had all kinds of gnats on it about a year ago, but it seemed to heal itself off. Now there's another hole, but no ooze or no gnats. So any ideas of what's going on with this?
I'd say the biggest problem here is that it is a pin oak. And there you go. Just do a basal cut and replant. But no, that you can't do that because pin oaks are massive trees very often in the landscape. So let's start with just pin oak growth habit in general. So our former horticulturist specialist, I think he worked for our pesticide safety team at the end of his career, Dave Robson. He would often remark to me about how he would see people planting pin oaks in their yards, and they plant them because of all the oaks, it's one of the faster growing ones. He said that it grows so fast that sometimes that terminal leader, that main trunk, that tip of that trunk would be so succulent in growth, it would just flop over because it had just grown so quickly. And that's if you can give them adequate water, plenty of water, and those pin oaks are going to put on a lot of growth pretty quickly. Now, the problem with pin oaks are that they can grow very quickly and they can grow very tall. So the house that I'm in right now, we have actually 2 pin oaks that are on the northern side of our house, and they are one of the tallest trees on our street. And if I could have gone back in time, I would have convinced the former owners to either not plant them or plant them farther away from the house, actually as far away as possible. Because as what this person comments about in this is that these pin oaks are losing limbs in windstorms. That is because pin oaks are lousy at shedding their limbs. So they're, in forest, trees are going to lose their lower limbs. That's just how it goes. Pin oaks, I find that if you just so much as look at them, maybe accidentally break a tip off of that little branch, that whole branch just up and dies on you. It seals off that branch at the main trunk, and it just says, all right, this whole lower branch is done for. Chris looked at me funny. I don't like that. And this maybe I'm being a bit extreme, but they just hold on to those dead limbs, and they just hold on to them. And then a storm comes along and they finally break off. So they are really bad at shedding limbs, which, if they could, like other species would shed them more normally, it might be smaller limbs here and there that are coming off that you wouldn't notice as often. But here it's usually larger limbs that are just falling out of the tree because of the windstorm. So that's a couple issues there. Now, the oozing hole, both of my pin oaks and the multiple pin oak calls that I have had this year and in years past about this particular oozing hole has to do with a bacterial infection in the tree itself. It's not necessarily a fatal infection, but it's not like it's good for the tree. So what this is, it's called slime flux, also known as wet wood. But this bacterial infection, what it does is it builds up in this sap in the vascular tissue, and it creates a lot of pressure. And that pressure, as it builds and builds, what does water like to do? It likes to find the easiest way or the lowest point. And so this is the same thing. It will find a wound or some opening, and it will ooze out of that particular wound. It could be a wound created by a lawnmower. It could be a wound created by a woodpecker or a squirrel. It could be a frost crack. Any weakness in that tissue, that pressure of that slime flux, that sap will push out of there. A healthy pin oak can easily wall this off, grow out of it, which is what it sounds like in this particular question is what happened. Now, the other kind of the last part of this question was, well, now there's a new hole, but there's no ooze and there's no insects buzzing around this particular spot. What's going on? So I did get a picture of this, and it looks like it's just something either done by a squirrel or perhaps a bird or a woodpecker, because I could tell that it's a hole about the size of a dime, maybe a bit smaller, and it's jagged and ragged around the edges. And so I guess, Ken, if it's an insect boring into wood, it would be more smoother, it wouldn't be as ragged in terms of how the damage appears.
Yeah, in my experience, especially a hole that big, probably be something coming out. And those are typically, you think about like hammer lash borer, those are very smooth margins and stuff on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would just say for pin oaks, if you do have them, keep a close eye on them for that slime flux, that bacterial infection. Highly do recommend having a certified arborist take a look at these trees to evaluate them, and just do everything you can to keep them healthy. And if you are going or you want to plant a pin oak, I would suggest as far away as possible from the house and do a soil test, because pin oaks are particularly sensitive to our soils here. Are kind of higher pH soils, which then cause a whole other slew of problems where the tree can't take up enough iron, and then you wind up losing your tree because of that. So pin oaks, not awful trees. Plant them far away from the house in good soil.
Yeah, for hollow trees, arborist.
Yep. Always.
Yeah, I don't know if all of them will have the tools, but I think there's different ways you can tell, but I don't know how to do it.
Some of them have very fancy tools. Others take a rubber mallet and they like whack the trunk of the tree and they put their ear on it. They're like, oh yeah, it's hollow in there. So, like an old prospector would, looking for gold. Well, Ken, you have been seeing a lot of teeny tiny little aphids everywhere. Why? And like, yeah, where are we seeing all these aphids at?
Yeah, so last year, sounded like a lot of places had a lot of aphids, but this year I've had more aphid questions than I had last year. And I don't know if that's, it was dry, so plants are stressed, and that's led them. Usually we see aphids more in cooler temperatures, but even now into the summer, I'm getting questions on aphids on tomatoes, several questions on aphids covering tomatoes, corn, milkweed, and not necessarily oleander aphids on milkweed, other types of aphids as well. So it seems to be, at least here in Jacksonville area, aphids everywhere, at least in some places. So fortunately, with aphids, typically they're not going to cause enough damage to kill a plant. It'll stress them some, but they're typically not feeding enough, or populations don't always get high enough to cause a lot of damage. You can see that especially on smaller plants, or if you get a whole bunch of them on the new succulent growth, feeding a lot, you could kill that new growth. But a lot of times nature takes care of itself. So there's all kinds of different predators, lady beetles, lacewings, parasitoid wasps, all kinds of things that will feed on aphids. So a lot of times, if you leave them, nature will run its course and get those populations down where they're not causing issues. If you've got high populations and you want to try and knock them down quickly, just a strong stream of water from your hose, blast them off the plant. Obviously, you don't want to do like a pressure washer and strip all the leaves off the plant, but knock the aphids off the plants. A lot of times they won't necessarily climb back on. Do that a couple of times. A lot of times that's all you need to do to reduce those populations. And then, if all else fails, you can use insecticides. But again, if you're doing this on blooming plants, most insecticides nowadays say do not use on plants that are in bloom. So it'd be more of a vegetable crop type situation. if you're going to be using insecticides. And you can use soaps or oils, and there's other things. So there's some safer or less toxic, should say, products that you can use for aphids.
I've seen a lot of issues on tulip poplars, and when you have aphids up in those shade trees, people underneath that tree, they often get coated in that wet honey. What is that? Honeydew? What do we call it? Honeydew. Okay. Yeah. And so but then a few weeks later, I start seeing a lot more lady beetles and a lot more other insects up in that canopy going to town.
Yeah, a lot of times if you give the predators and stuff a little time to find them, they'll clean up pretty well for you. But you got to be patient and give them the chance.
Yeah, I think, yeah, we'll talk about this in a second. So yeah, when we get to Magnolia scale.
Before we get to that, so we have another tree question here. So why did my ash tree fall over? It seemed healthy, and we've treated it for EAB every year.
Well, let me share some pictures again here. Let me get them preloaded in the old picture sharing machine. Well, Ken, can you see my screen with looks like a ornamental pear on the left side of the image? It already is dealing with some problems, but then there's a little vacant spot there in the landscape as well.
Yes.
All right. So we'll see if you. Let's see if Ken can figure out what's wrong with this here picture. Oh my gosh, is that Jordy Nelson's jersey from the Green Bay Packers? A wide receiver, Hall of Famer. I'm so sorry, Ken. As a Bears fan, I didn't mean to show you that picture. Big fan of Jordy. He went to Kansas State. That's where I went. So go Wildcats. Back to the issue at hand. So this is the former location of an ash tree. I would say the DBH of this tree was about maybe a foot, maybe about 12 inches, I would say. And that's check this out, Ken. What does that look like?
Oh man, some crazy circling roots there.
Some nasty circling roots. And this is after a stump grinder went through here and probably cut out some other roots as well. And so this is just one side of the tree. As I kicked around more and more soil, I uncovered more and more circling roots right here. This is a massive circling root on kind of next to that other more apparent ones. And this one is really just a wall of wood of roots that was strangling this tree that was really planted too deeply. Again, just more shots of these circling roots. Again, there's the ones that are apparent. There's even more on this other side. And really what happened in this instance was a strong wind had come through and had there was a little bit of an opening in this neighborhood, and we could see directly to the kind of the northwestish side of the neighborhood where this wind came through and just pushed this tree over that had been girdled and rotted at the base. And it just snapped like a toothpick. And that's not it. That's a different tree. So yeah, these girdling roots. So that goes into the idea that how we plant our tree and really the selection of those original materials that we put in the ground is so important, and trying to eliminate as many circling roots as we can see. There's a lot of different strategies to do that. Some of them is just like making some slit cuts on the root ball. That's probably the least invasive one. The others then doing the box cut method where you just shave off those outer roots when you take them out of that pot. And then probably the most aggressive method is you take that tree out of the pot and you wash off every piece of potting mix on that root ball and you prune off everything that looks like a circling root. And then you splay those roots out in the planting hole, and then you plant that tree to try to eliminate any circling roots. Very often does not happen though. And as is the case, you invest the money and time of buying the tree, planting it, and then treating it for emerald ash borer and taking care of this tree for years, only for it to already be dead, because of the way it was raised and planted in the nursery. And then, all of that money, all that time, all that investment in that tree, it just snaps off like a toothpick.
Yeah, those are some crazy girdling roots.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've ever seen one that bad.
It was quite a sight to see, and how, I didn't find a non-girdling root in this whole planting hole. They were all going in a circle. So, and when I asked the folks where this was planted by a landscaper. They did not plant this tree. So let's just be mindful, keep an eye on things. The other thing that I also tell folks, if they're like, and when I see circling roots, the tree's still alive, I do the wiggle test. We've probably talked about it on the show before, but I grab the tree by the trunk, kind of low down if I can, and I push and pull on it and I wiggle it. Try not to break it, especially if it's a small or weak tree. But if I can see that soil of that root ball move, I know that it has not anchored into that native soil and that it's probably got more and more circling roots, and it might not be established at all into that native soil. It's only a matter of time before something like this happens. A windstorm comes and just snaps that tree in half.
It's crazy.
Yeah. That was neat. It was not, boy,
depending on your perspective.
Weird. Depending on your perspective, it was a pretty interesting thing to come across. Yeah. Speaking of coming across interesting things, another one that I have also seen a lot of this year, but Ken, you have been getting, it seems like it's coming from your neck of the woods, or you might be responsible for this, Magnolia scale. This stuff is everywhere. I'm getting calls from Southern Illinois, Eastern Illinois, Western Illinois. I'm not getting much from Northern Illinois, but it seems to all be happening in Central Illinois and southward. So Magnolia scale, what is the deal?
Yeah, talking with some other people. Yeah, it seems to be this year and the last couple of years. There seems to be more and more calls about Magnolia scale for whatever reason. I have not been going around and spreading it. Not yet, anyway. So if you're not familiar with that, if you've got so our native magnolias don't typically have problems with it. They may get it, but they don't really cause many issues. It's more our non-native species, star, saucer, and lily magnolias are some of the most susceptible ones that they found for these. Whereas our native species, the cucumber tree magnolia, is pretty resistant to it, so rarely damaged. And like sweet bay magnolia, they found it is rarely attacked. So a lot of this is going to depend on the type of magnolia you have. But I think a lot of people have these non-native or hybrid types. Magnolias. That's probably why we're seeing it more and more. So this time of year, they're going to be white or maybe even pinkish on the branches, usually on underside branches. They produce a tremendous amount of honeydew. See a lot of sooty mold, that black fungal growth on the leaves of plants. Makes everything look unsightly. If you park a car under it, your car is going to be nice and sticky. And if you don't drive it for a while or clean it, it's going to get nice and black as well. And with these, management can be a little bit tricky. A lot of this is going to depend on the timing. So this time of year, now we're getting into August, a lot of times the eggs are going to start hatching, and the crawlers, not only for Magnolia scale, but for scale in general, crawlers are going to be the easiest stage to manage because they haven't created that hard coating that's going to protect them from contact insecticide sprays. So when those crawlers are out, that's when we want to apply insecticides to kill those, because the females, once they lay the eggs, they'll die. So they'll be done, and they can stick around on the tree for a period of time. So you may need to scrape them off if you are treating to make sure they're dead and stuff in subsequent years. So the timing is going to be important now. You can do it again in the spring, kind of when they start waking up. You can do a dormant spray as well. But one of the problems I think with this is that with magnolias, they can get pretty big. And for a typical homeowner, you're probably not going to have the equipment to be able to spray 20, 30 feet up into a canopy of a tree. which is going to cause some issues with getting good coverage because you can get the bottom fine, but if you're not getting the top, you're not going to manage those scales up there, and they're just going to keep spreading. So you can use systemic insecticides as well. This can be done in the fall, and they had some success. Where was that? It was in Ohio State. They did some studies, and they found applying imidacloprid plants in early May did a really good job of managing Magnolia scale. So, and again, that may be something you're having a pest or landscape company, some kind of pest control people applying this as well, depending on how big the tree and stuff is. And with your systemic, you're applying that to the soil. The plant will take that up, move that insecticide throughout the tree and protect itself. So similar to like an EAB, emerald ash borer management with that. So there are things you can do, but timing and proper application are going to be important for that. And I think that's one of the reasons why people may not get adequate management on that. And another interesting thing is ants will often farm or protect them. Same thing with aphids. These insects that produce honeydew, ants will feed on that, and they will protect those insects from natural enemies. So there's some research done in Kentucky, and they found that if magnolia trees where ants were excluded, so they put up like sticky stuff so ants couldn't climb up and down the trees, there was an 82% reduction in the number of magnolia scale on those trees because natural enemies could then get to them and attack them. Not that we want to be killing all of our ants, but just a interesting aside.
Yes, that was the question I was going to ask you about the aphids. Were the ants? I have seen ants take even like caterpillars that aren't going to bother the aphids or the scale and take them and throw them off the plant, just like everybody off except for the aphids or scale, because we love their poop. We are going to drink their poop. It's full of sugar and goodness.
Yeah, they're basically, cattle ranchers. They're tending to them and protecting them and making sure nothing gets to them.
Mm-hmm. And again, let me stress also the importance of personal protective equipment, PPE, when you're spraying into trees, anything above your head, which I don't recommend. I say if you're spraying above your head, hire someone or don't do it, or figure something else out. The very common active ingredient I see for magnolia scale crawler control is malthion, which is a pretty potent insecticide. It might not even be available in some states anymore. And so just please protect yourself. Don't put a mask on or something. Don't spray with your mouth wide open, up into the tree. It just drips back down into your mouth.
Yeah. No t-shirt, shorts, sandals. Mm-hmm. Cover as much of your body as you can.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And above your head, you probably want to look at coveralls, or especially if you have to get under the tree. You don't have anything that's powerful enough to stand further away. And
you think you'll keep it off of you, but it can drip easily. You'll realize that soon. It's raining insecticide all around you. So just protect yourself.
Read the label.
Read it good. Follow it.
All right. Now we've got one more question we haven't necessarily heard about, but we might potentially hear about, since this year is a cicada year, is the oak leaf gall mite.
So many galls for oaks, and now we have this one. Oh, Ken, I'm itching right now just thinking about it. Describe this oak leaf gall mite.
So back in 2007 in the Chicago area, there's a lot of reports of people coming down with rashes and itching really bad. And they found that it was the most likely culprit. I think they confirmed that it was oak leaf gall mite. So this is a mite that's around all the time, and they typically feed on some midges that form galls, pocket galls. Usually, I think it was pin oak trees. In oak trees, so the mites will crawl in there. The females will feed on those larvae, the fly larvae, the midges, and then they'll reproduce, create more mites, and kind of the cycle goes on. And sometimes they can reach levels where they can cause problems. They'll fall to the ground once that gall no longer has any midges in it. They'll fall to the ground in hopes of the wind will disperse them, and if they land on people, they'll bite them, and it can cause that itching and irritation and stuff. But in 2007, they found they were actually feeding on eggs that cicadas laid. So periodical cicadas have been laid eggs in the tips of branches all over the place. We have probably billions, if not trillions, of cicada eggs all over the place. And now, so we have this giant food source for these mites, and feeding on them, populations explode. We have more mites falling to the ground, landing on people. And typically these are going to be on like the neck, shoulder, chest area because they're falling down from trees, bite people. And I think I saw it was usually 10 to 16 hours after being exposed to them is when you start itching and stuff. So it's kind of, at first people kind of had a hard time associating as how this happened and stuff, but through investigation, they narrowed it down to this particular mite. So not say it's going to happen, but we have seen it in the past. I think they saw it out in like Washington, D.C. and Ohio in previous years, an uptick in these mites following in years they had periodical cicada emergence.
Wow. So in addition to watching out for chiggers coming from brush underfoot, now don't stand under the oak trees.
Chiggers from below and gall mites from above.
Ooh, it's a rough year for them cicada folks. Maybe I lucked out not having any periodical cicadas in my backyard. So, ooh.
Yeah, and so some of the recommendations, try to avoid areas that could potentially have these, which easier said than done, depending on where you're at. Again, trying to cover as much of your skin as possible. Removing that clothing if you're outside in an area where these potentially are at, showering frequently if you're going to be exposed to these long periods of time, so you get them off your body, stuff like that. I've heard conflicting advice on insect repellent like DEET, whether or not it'll work. It's not going to hurt to put it on, but there's some people say recommend it, others say don't bother because it doesn't really work. So take that for what it's worth. I would say maybe err on the side of caution, put it on. If nothing else, you'll repel the mosquitoes and ticks too. So
that's right. Yeah. A good insect to repel mosquitoes and ticks. Yeah. It sounds like those gall mites are just falling on you, taking a bite.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, I think I saw somewhere they can produce, a tree can produce thousands of them, tens of thousands. And that's without periodical cicadas and this giant food source. And now periodical cicadas have been hatching. I've seen pictures on social media. People have managed to see the actual nymphs coming out, hatching out and stuff. I have not seen any yet. Most of the egg laying in my yard is too high up to see, but the few that are low enough, I haven't seen any. They probably already hatched, but
keep watching, Ken.
Yes.
Stay vigilant. Take those pictures when they do. Well, that was a lot of great information about what is going on around Illinois as we get started with August here in 2024. Well, the Good Growing Podcast is a production of University of Illinois Extension, edited this week by me, Chris Enroth. Hey, Ken, thanks for being with me, as always, every single week, chatting now about, some of the issues and problems we've been seeing as we get into the later part of the summer.
Yes, thank you. It was fun. And probably enjoyed those girdling roots more than I should have, but those were impressive.
We enjoyed them so that you, dear listeners and viewers, can do something about them.
Yes. And let's do this again next week.
Oh, we shall do this again next week. Old-timey garden remedies. Do they work? What are some interesting ones out there that we probably would not catch ourselves doing anymore? Well, we're going to chat about those next week. That'll be a fun one. Looking at some of them old-timey stuff that, we don't often recommend anymore. So we're going to cover those. Well, listeners, thank you for doing what you do best, and that is listening. Or if you're watching us on YouTube, watching. And as always, keep on growing.